Troubleshooting AAA. As your Cisco network grows from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 different devices, somewhere along that road, it's going to become flat out impractical to have local usernames and passwords on all your devices that have to change every X number of days in order to pass a security audit. So, that's where AAA can come in. AAA defines methods for authentication, bing, 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 that's the big one, by the way, that everybody thinks of with AAA. Authorization, which is what people can do once they authenticate. And then accounting, which is what people did. It's tracking and logging of commands issued and sessions established while the system is running. So, AAA can be configured on any Cisco device. It's as simple as going into global configuration mode and typing in AAA, and the only command you can type in initially is new model, which turns it on. Now once you do that, you type in AAA and you have a whole library of commands available to you. That's always a fun one for me. I don't know why. It's almost like when you're playing a video game and you unlock this secret door and you're like, oh, look at all these levels. So essentially AAA, where I almost always go, is authentication, right? The first thing you want to do is define a method. So I'm going to say AAA authentication, and we can type in, this is going to be a method for logins to my device, right? I'm going to say the login method I'm going to use is called Jeremy. Now you can type in default, and that will be the default authentication that you use for all the different aspects of this router if you don't define another one. So I'm just going to create a custom one called Jeremy, and inside of Jeremy I'm going to say, okay, the logins that I prefer is, first off, I want to use the server group of Radius servers, right? Because you can configure a Radius server from anything. You can go on Windows and install IAS, or in more modern Windows operating system, you want to use NPS, Network Policy Server. Or you can go on Linux and install free Radius and tear your eyes out because it's so difficult. But anyway, besides all that, the Radius server acts as that centralized user database where you can put all your user accounts as your Active Directory server or whatever, to where you can put your user accounts over there, have everybody pointed to those Radius server group, and that way this guy can have policies associated with it that rotates his not his username, but his password every X days, and has complexity requirements and everything like that. So the devices will look to the Radius server for those authentication credentials, right? So that would be my primary. But what if those Radius servers go down? Or what if my device ends up in a network severed situation to where it can't reach the Radius server? Well, then I better have some kind of backup. And that's where I would use the local user database as a backup every single time to the Radius server. Now, if an intruder knows a local username and password, that may make your device a little more vulnerable. Now, the way this system works is it's not like, well, if you fail authentication on the Radius servers, then I'll fail over and use the, then I'll fail over and use the local user database, right? No. If you fail authentication on the Radius servers, you're done. It's not going to go to the local. The only time it uses the local is if the Radius server connection has been severed on all ends. So, an attacker, if he has credentials from the local user database, may attempt to take the device offline, because then he can use those credentials to log in and get into the device. But obviously, if you've got any kind of network monitoring or people using that device, that it will send up red flags. So that's why having local is always good backup. Second thing, when it comes to enabling AAA, By the way, this is not the end of the road. This just defines the method. I would still have to come in and define my radius servers and say, well, here's the IP addresses of my radius server, and I would type in radius server host and the IP address of that radius server over there in the picture, etc. So there would be more configuration of the radius server, and I would also have to go underneath and say line VTY 0 space 4 and say login and type in the authentication method that I just create, Jeremy, right there. But you would also want to make sure you go under line console 0. Actually, before we do that, let's do AAA authentication, and we'll do a login method called none. And the type of authentication it's going to have is none. And what I do is I go under line VTY. Oh, of course, can't use none. How about nothing? And I'm going to go under line console 0 and type in login authentication nothing. To make sure there's no login required for a console port. I have been burned on all ends on the console port, by the way. I have assigned passwords to it, and I've been yelled at because people, the device is down, they run in, they're like, what's the password? Where's the document? I don't know. Whose desk drawer is it in? I can't, the network's down, I can't get to the file, and people are like, why did you set a password on the console port? And then I've said, okay, well, let's do this and have no password on the console port, and I failed a security audit. They're like, well, if I get to the device, I can plug right in and get into. I'm like, well, come on, give me, anyway. If you can get to the device, obviously you failed the security audit already. So anyhow, I'm on a soapbox. That is how you can enable AAA authentication on your devices. So what can go wrong with AAA? Well, obviously not turning it on, not creating a user account on whatever area you've specified. If it's on the radius server, not having it there. If it's on the local user database, not having it there. Not having an authentication method defined, meaning what I just did, defining that Jeremy method, that's a method. So not defining a method will prevent it from operating. Not applying it to the lines. So you saw I did login authentication Jeremy to apply my method to the lines. If you forget to do that, it's not going to work. And then AAA failover misunderstood. That's what I was talking about, where I said radius was first and the local database second. It's not going to fail over from radius to local unless radius servers are completely down, right? So not understanding that may mislead you, because that local user database is not going to work at all unless the radius servers are down. A lot of people think they can still get in using that back door. So verifying this, you can go on your device and do a show run section AAA, and it'll show every AAA command that you have typed in. You can also look at VTY and see that it was applied correctly to your VTY lines. And then it's in action. You can do a section username to see the usernames that you've created on the switch. Like right here, we'd have a major problem if I needed a backdoor because I don't have any user accounts. Debug AAA authentication will actually show you the authentication process to the screen while it's happening. So when somebody tries to log in, it'll say, hey, I see this username, I'm checking this password. It never displays the password in clear text, so don't worry about that. But it will tell you if it's passing or failing based on whatever methods you've created. You now understand how to troubleshoot AAA. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.